Hi, Manny Talavera here. So what we're going to do in this particular module is I'm going to go over Jay Abraham's backstory with you. And we're going to start from around the time Jay Abraham was 20 years old. And what's interesting about Jay's situation is Jay took on many different jobs over a period of time. And Jay would tend to work a job for anywhere from 6 to 9 months, and then he would leave for one reason or another. And he worked in many different positions. And so we're going to walk you through all of those. And all of those actually took Jay to where he is now, which is basically the highest paid marketing consultant in the world. And you're going to see what he was learning about marketing in each position. We're going to talk about, what he learned and a lot of times why he left. Now, before we get into that, I do want to talk to you about compensation for a few minutes, because Jay said that while he was working in all of these different positions, he was learning about compensation. And he was learning that a person could get paid after they do the work. And that would be an employee-employer relationship. And a person could get paid a percentage of the money before they do the work and a percentage of the money after they do the work. And in some cases, a person could get paid before they do any of the work. And in addition to that, a person could get paid a little bit of money up front and then an ongoing percentage of the revenue that they brought into the company. And Jay was always looking for a revenue share. And a lot of the times the reason Jay left a position is because he did not feel he was being adequately compensated for the money he brought into a company. And you're going to see that over a period of time, him leaving different positions because he didn't feel like he was being adequately compensated. Now, in addition to that type of compensation, Jay also learned that you could be paid instead of money, you could be paid in goods or services. And so what Jay learned about here was he learned about barter and trade out and funny money. And he learned that in some cases, that can be as good as cash, or in some cases maybe even better. Especially the barter can be used yourself or transferred to someone else who could use that. You could actually turn that barter or trade out into cash, and you could conduct a lot of business that way. And he learned a lot about barter and trade out. We're going to talk about those things. So the other thing is that, Jay struggled for a very long period of time. And ultimately, Jay became very successful. And Jay had periods where he made millions of dollars, and then he had a lot of periods where he was broke. And so you might hear me talk about how Jay had made money over here and made large amounts of money, and then over here he's talking about how broke he is. And, Jay went through 5 different divorces. I think Jay has 8 kids. When he was going through these divorces, he was in California, probably not the best place to get divorced. And generally when you get divorced, you lose half of your net worth. So if you look at someone who loses half of their net worth, and they also have, child support and alimony payments, and you multiply that times 3 or 4 or 5 times, you can see how a person could go broke. And so Jay had a lot of, relationships that fell apart. And he also had some business divorces also where he, would walk away from a business relationship, and he would actually, give that person a very large compensation. And so that's another thing that kind of created that situation, if you will. So Jay's actually from Indianapolis, Indiana, and that's 50 miles from where I'm at right now. I'm in Newcastle, 50 miles east of here. That's Indianapolis, and Jay's from Indianapolis, and I lived there and spent a lot of time there. And so when Jay was telling these stories, I could really relate to where he was talking about what he was doing, because I was familiar with those areas. So by the time Jay was 20, he was married and he had 2 kids. And Jay stated that he had the needs of a 40-year-old, but the marketplace didn't really care. And the problem is Jay had no formal education. He didn't have any college or anything. So the type of jobs Jay could get were very minimal. He couldn't get a high-paying job out of the gate. And Jay's first position was as a cost accountant. and he worked in this position for about 9 months. And what he said he learned from that was that a lot of times, in production and manufacturing, even though they have budgets for everything, there are always budget overruns. And they always spend more money than they anticipate. And they don't really pay any attention to that. And they don't stick to budgets or anything. And he said that it was very, very interesting how they set budgets and they spent a lot of time doing that. And then the rest of the year, they were basically over budget and until they went into the next fiscal year. And Jay worked in this position for 9 months. And he went up for his first raise. And he qualified for somewhere between $12.50 and $40 a month. And Jay got like $25 a month. And the person who was sitting right beside Jay, after Jay found out he got what his raise was, he found out that the guy who sat right beside him had been with the company 10 years and was only making $100 a month more than Jay. And that had a profound impact on Jay, and Jay quit. And he took a job with Prudential Insurance as a debit insurance agent. And a debit insurance agent is a person who basically collects on insurance and also sells insurance. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, people couldn't afford to pay for insurance by the month. And so what they would do is they would actually buy insurance, and they would pay for that insurance by the week or bi-weekly. And so a person would sell insurance on a route, and then they would go out and weekly or bi-weekly collect that insurance, and they would generally collect through the day, and then they would have a little bit of a break, and they would go back in the evening and they would sell at night. And Jay lived in Indianapolis, but his territory was in Greenfield, which was about 20 miles southeast of Indianapolis. And so Jay had a morning route where he would be collecting insurance, and then he would have some time off in the afternoon, and then in the evening he would go out and he would sell insurance. And Jay learned a lot about the human dynamic and families and relationships and opportunities. And what Jay learned was that for every front end, there was a back end. And he talks a lot about pipelines in a number of these jobs, and he was building a pipeline. So at first he was making absolutely no money. But what he said was that because you were collecting on insurance weekly or bi-weekly, you got to meet with the family and you got to know everyone. And so what you found out was, you found out about divorces, and you found out about, people who were having kids. And sometimes people would have kids and those kids would actually get married and move out of the house. And there were all these other opportunities to sell insurance because you were in front of that person on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And Jay did that job again for around 6 to 9 months. He quit the job because he didn't like the split shift schedule of, going out in the morning and collecting, and then later on in the evening having to go back out. And Jay left that position, and he took a job with Shoppers Charge. And Shoppers Charge was a credit card. And Jay became a collection agent for the credit card company. And what's interesting, he said at the time there were maybe 10 different collection agents in the office. And Shoppers Charge was a premium credit card, very similar to American Express. So you applied for the card and you got the card, and you could use the card, but you were supposed to pay the card off each month. It wasn't revolving debt or anything. And so they were in charge of actually calling people who had not paid their balance in full. And Jay said that, in the office what people would do is they would call someone and they would make a payment arrangement for this person to make a payment on the 15th. And then what they would do is they would set in the computer to go back on the 20th and look to see if that person made the payment. And Jay said that didn't make any sense at all. And Jay said what he would do, he would set this person up to make a payment on the 15th. And he would actually put them in the computer to call them on the 14th and remind them to make the payment. And then once he reminded them to make the payment, he would set the computer so that he would call them, he would check on the 20th to see if the payment did show up. The payment did show up. He would pick the phone up, call them, thank them for their payment. And then what he would do is he would schedule the next payment right then. And he said that he found that you could do very, very well if you treated people very kind. And if you didn't treat people very kind, you wouldn't get very far. And he became very, very good at collecting, on these credit cards. Well, about the time this happened, there was major deregulation in the credit card industry. And Visa and MasterCard mailed out literally like 500,000 cards each. They both sent out 500,000 cards. And basically, you didn't apply for the card or anything. You would just go and get the card and it would be in the mail. And after the deregulation, all of these companies were sending out massive amounts of cards, but they were not paying any attention to the demographic or the people who they sent the cards to. And so they created a lot of collections problems. And Shoppers Charge, they wanted to be competitive in the marketplace. And so what they did is they also sent out hundreds of thousands of cards. And not only did they did that, they went from being a premium service where you would pay the card off to a revolving debt service where you could charge the card and you could pay on a monthly basis. And Jay said that, each of the people in the office, originally they were responsible for 5 or 10,000 accounts. And he said just like overnight, they each had 40,000 accounts they were collecting on. And he said not only were they collecting on accounts, they were also approving credit. And they had no rhyme or reason, no database. So someone would call into the office and ask for a credit increase, and they would basically just, with no regard to any reason or any factual information, approve or disapprove a person's credit increase. Now, with this deregulation and putting all of these cards in the marketplace, Shoppers Charge became also a collection agency. And what they started doing is they started buying all of this credit card debt that was going bad. And so they went to Visa and they went to MasterCard and they bought 50,000 accounts here, 50,000 accounts there. And so now they were also in the collection industry. The problem, though, is a lot of people got a Visa card and they started using that Visa card and they got in trouble with it. But Visa did not call these people and say, hey, we've sent your bill over to Shoppers Charge. You now are going to be paying them. So Shoppers Charge would be sending letters. People would get letters from Shoppers Charge. They would throw them in the trash. They would assume it's junk mail. They would get calls from Shoppers Charge who they don't know who Shoppers Charge are. And they would ignore the calls and assume it's telemarketers. So it became very, very difficult to collect on all of this credit card debt. And Jay said that Shoppers Charge was one of the first people to actually institute sending out a series of letters to customers in order to get them to pay. And he said one of the letters they sent out was very, very interesting. And the letter was a 2-page letter. And on the first page it said, hey, just send you this letter to remind you that because you're so delinquent on your card, we have to take the following action. See next page. And they did not send a page 2. And so people would get this letter and they would be very, very curious about what Shoppers Charge was going to do. And they would call in. And it created a situation where people would call in and actually make arrangements to pay. And the reason they called in was because they were curious about, what it said on the second part of the letter and what page 2 said. And Jay worked at this job for a period of time. And then when it came time for raises, Jay did not get a raise. And he said he felt that he did not get a raise because he did not have a college degree or anything. He said it seemed like everyone who was there who had a college degree, they got very large raises, but Jay didn't have one and Jay didn't get a raise. And so Jay quit and Jay went to work for WIBC Radio. So right around the same time that Jay Abraham went to work for WIBC Radio, a couple of things happened. The first thing that happened is they had a major format change. And when they had that format change, they actually went from number 9 in the ratings to number 1. And so the ratings of the radio station went way up, and it became a lot easier to sell radio advertising. And then the other thing that happened is they had just hired a brand new sales manager. And this sales manager was a former drill sergeant. And what's interesting about this is there were around 7 or 8 people in the radio station selling airtime, and they were all struggling, and they were all making like $20,000 a year. And after they brought this sales manager in, their money went from $20,000 a year to $50,000 a year plus, and they still just hated this guy. He was literally a drill sergeant, and what he did is he had 10 meetings a week. He had one at 8 a.m. every morning and one at 5 p.m. And at 8 a.m. in the morning, you were going to tell him who you were going to be calling on, and at 5 p.m. you had to state who you spoke with and what ultimately happened from that conversation. And if you went in and said you spoke with someone, he would pick the phone up and call the guy and ask if you spoke with him. I mean, he was a stickler, and he would call people out, and he basically forced people to work. And like I said, when he did this, everyone's income who was a sales rep, their incomes went from $20,000 to $50,000 a year plus. And what Jay said was that in addition to that, they created packages, and he said that what it amounted to, when you have an unlimited supply of anything to sell, it's very hard to sell any of it. And people mostly want drive time. So drive time is 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and maybe 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. And that's what everyone wants to buy, but no one wants to buy the other blocks of time. And so what this guy did is he created packages of 25 and 50 spots and 100 spots. And you would get some drive time, but you would get these other spots as well. And when people went out to sell, rather than just selling airtime, they had these packages they had to focus on. And Jay said that when he first got there, he said it took him months and months, and he learned so much about building a pipeline of business, because he said that, he was on a draw against commission, and he said some months he would hit commission, but he was so deep into the draw from previous months he still didn't make any money. But he said when that first commission check hit, he made $2,000 the first month, and then $3,000 the second month, and $5,000 the third month, and $6,000 the fourth month. And he said that, he really learned about building a pipeline, and he also learned about, getting paid on sales versus getting paid on collections. You see, in the radio spots, you're selling these spots, so you have to go out and sell them. Then you have to create the spot, and then the spot might run for 30 or 60 days before you actually go out and collect on it and get paid. And he said when they were getting paid on sales, people were just selling anyone they could get in front of. But unfortunately, a lot of those sales went bad, and so they started getting paid on collections. And so you didn't get paid until the revenue was actually brought into the door. And he said that when they changed from sales to collections, everyone spent a lot more time cultivating that relationship and making sure that these people could afford to make the payment and would make the payment. And Jay said he learned a lot about compensation just from dealing with that. And then he also learned, and he learned this over many, many jobs, but this was his first taste of trade out, barter, and that type of funny money. You see, in the radio business, so you got the radio industry, the newspaper industry, the airline industry, the rental car industry, the hotel industry. These people basically, in a lot of cases, sell time, and the thing is, you can't move that time to someplace else. And so, in the radio industry, it's very, very simple. After deregulation, you had 6.5 minutes of airtime per hour that you could use for commercials. So if, at 7 o'clock, from 7 to 8, you only sold 10 of those minutes. You couldn't move those minutes into the next hour. They were gone. And that was the same way with airlines and hotel reservations. So if someone gets on a plane and flies from Indianapolis to California, and that plane is 40% sold, they can't sell that space. It's gone. It's moved out. And so there was a lot of trade out in the radio station business, in the airtime business. So they would trade for airlines, and they would trade for rental cars, and they would trade for hotel reservations, and they would trade for restaurants, and they would use that trade out many different ways. So they would give the rental cars to their sales reps. They would use the trade out from restaurants to take clients out to dinner. The airline tickets were used many different ways. One of the ways they used the airline tickets was for contests on the radio station. So you would hear someone can win a round-trip ticket to Florida. That was actually given to them in trade out for advertising space. And that's basically how the game worked. And so that he learned all of these things about how this funny money worked. And what's interesting is when they started using the funny money in this trade out to sell spots, to sell radio time, it became very easy to sell the radio time. And what he said was that, it's very interesting because they were going and calling on businesses, and the businesses they were calling on, they were not talking to the owners. They were talking to business managers. And so they would go in and talk to a business manager and maybe get nowhere with that business manager. And the next week they would go back and they'd say, we've got a special promotion we're doing. If you buy 150 spots today, we're giving you a round-trip ticket to Florida. And he said that people would just buy the spots sight unseen right then. And he said what they were doing, they weren't using those airline tickets and passing them on to employees or customers or giving them to the owner. They were using them themselves. And he said that when they started, giving away the airline tickets and the cruise ship tickets and hotel space, it became very easy to sell airtime. And he worked there for a number of months, and then he decided he was going to leave. And what he did is he applied for a job, and there was an ad for Hertz Rent-A-Truck, and it basically said, if you want to work in a fast, dynamic environment, and you want to get paid compensation based on how you perform, and you want a free rental car, apply at Hertz Rent-A-Truck. Well, Jay picks the phone up, and what it was an ad where you had to actually send in your resume to a post office box. Well, Jay figured, he would actually go around that plan. And what Jay did, he called the operator, and he got the address to Hertz. And so what he did is he sent a 16-page sales letter, and it basically said, if you want to hire the best sales rep in the country who generally smashes goals in months that are set for years out, you want to call this number on Tuesday at 7 p.m. And Jay was just convinced this guy was going to call him and get a job, give him a job, And so, Jay goes home and he sits by the phone waiting for the phone to ring, and Tuesday the phone doesn't ring, Wednesday the phone doesn't ring. The guy finally calls him on Thursday and gives him the job, and the guy says, Jay, I would have called you 3 days earlier, but you sent the letter to Hertz Rental Car, not Hertz Rental Truck. And that's the reason the guy didn't get it. So the guy gave Jay a job. And Jay was really excited. He thought, he's going to get a bigger piece of the pie now because it was pay based on compensation, based on revenue and all that. But unfortunately, Jay was used to dealing with front office business people in a business environment, and the first thing that happened is Jay had two options on the vehicle. He could either get a station wagon or a truck, and Jay thought he was going to get this nice fancy sports car, so he took the station wagon, and he really hated it. And then the other thing that happened is he said that he was meeting, rather than going into offices and meeting people in offices, he was actually dealing with warehouse managers and renting trucks by the year, and fleets of trucks, and it was all done back office in warehouses that weren't heated, and people wearing overhauls in very, very cold and dirty environments. And he said he just didn't like it. And he said, there was an opportunity there, but he envisioned something completely different. And so he left, and he took a job with Schick Razor. So when Jay made the move from Hertz to Schick Razor, he felt like this was a real opportunity. They were giving him a company car. He was salary based, plus a bonus based on revenue. He felt he was going to do very, very well here. And unfortunately, right after he took the position, they actually came in and they cut his territory in half. And they increased his quota by 5 times before he would actually qualify for a bonus. But Jay wasn't dejected, and he was learning how to sell, and he felt he was going to do very, very well here. And so he immersed himself in this industry, and what he found was that razors were sold around 4 areas of the year. They were sold around Christmas time, they were sold around Father's Day, they were sold around Valentine's Day, and graduation. That's when people tended to buy razors. He said there were around 5 million people who used electric razors, and there were around 30 million people who used disposables. And you couldn't really convert someone who used disposables into a person who would use an electric. You had to actually go out and convert someone who had bought a Remington razor and get them to buy a Schick razor. And that's what he was, his focus was on how to actually do this and move more razors. And he was actually learning a lot about the retail distribution and all of that. And what he found was that, he had to sell the razors to wholesalers. But wholesalers would not take an order unless he went out and sold the razors first. And so in order for him to get a wholesaler to take an order from him, he had to go to a drugstore or a retail outlet, and he had to convince that group of people to buy $25,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 worth of razors. And when he did that, he would take them the order, and they would place an order with Schick. And he thought this was the wrong way to do things, but this is just the way the business was set up. And so he was calling on a lot of drugstores and a lot of drugstore chains and a lot of retail outlets, and he was trying to sell these razors. And he was doing decent at it, and then what happened is he found this little clause about co-op advertising. And co-op advertising is very simple. Let's say you sell cars for Ford. Ford will say, if you sell $1 million worth of cars, we will spend $50,000 on advertising if you will match that. So Ford would give someone $50,000 worth of ads if they matched the $50,000, but Ford had to approve the ads. And most larger manufacturing companies, most larger companies have co-op advertising, but it's not either not used effectively, or people don't even know about it. And what Jay found was that there were a lot of billboards all over the Indianapolis area, and the billboards ended at the end of October. But people would not renew their billboard because they knew that no one would come in and buy that space between October and December. And so what Jay did, Jay was able to go in and make a deal, and he bought like $150,000 worth of billboard space all over Indianapolis for like $10,000 or $15,000. He commandeered all of this money that was co-op advertising money, and then he used that to sell razors. So what he would do is he would walk into a drugstore and he would say, if you buy $50,000 worth of razors, I'm going to give you $50,000 worth of billboard space. You're not going to have to pay for any of it. And this was very, very successful. And Jay ultimately sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of razors in about 60 or 90 days. And then what happened, Jay went in to find out what his bonus was going to be. Because you got to keep in mind, they increased his his quota by like 5x, and he actually blew that out of the water by 5x or something. So he figured he would qualify for a very large bonus. And he went in and said, you know, I want to know what my bonus is going to be. And they said, well, that's not how our business works. You don't get a bonus based on what you sell. You get a bonus based on how the company does overall, and that bonus comes in the first quarter of the next year based on what the overall company does. And Jay was very, very dejected about this. And Jay immediately went and found another job. And he found a job working for a dry cleaner. Now, the problem is he was going to get a rental car from the dry cleaner, but most places would not give you a rental car until after you'd been with the company for 30 days. And so Jay did not want to let go of the rental car that he had with Schick Razor. And so he went in and quit. And he said, and by the way, I want to use the rental car for 30 days. And they said, well, that's just not possible at all. And what Jay said is very, very interesting. Jay said, that's interesting and all. He said, but what you all don't know is I've got $400,000 worth of razors sold all over Indianapolis. I haven't written anything down, and it's all in my head. And if I give you the car, you're not going to get those sales. But if you let me use the car for 30 days, and you let me work with the new person coming in, I will slowly give them those sales, and they can go out and they can write those up, and you guys can actually send those to the, pick up the orders from the wholesaler. And there was a stalemate for about 2 days, and they ended up letting Jay keep the car. Now what's interesting is Jay said that Schick Razor was notorious for not giving people their last check. They would renege on agreements they made. And Jay said that about 2.5 or 3 weeks into this agreement, one of the regional managers calls Jay and says, Jay, I'm flying in and I want to meet you at the airport and I want to have dinner with you. And Jay kind of knew what the deal was. They were coming to get Jay's car and they weren't keeping the agreement. So, you know, Jay actually drives to the airport and he meets the guy, and they're supposed to eat dinner, and they just basically meet for drinks, and the guy says, I need your car keys. And Jay says, that's fine. He passes his keys over, and the guy looks and says, what is this? And Jay says, well, I didn't drive that car. I drove my car. And what's interesting about this is Jay had this beat-up car that didn't run very well, and the heater didn't work at all, and the radiator had a leak. And so in order to run this thing, he had to pour alcohol into the radiator, and he said that he would do this, but the heater didn't work, but he knew they were going to come and get the car. And so he ended up going to get this guy, and the guy says, well, I want your car. And Jay says, well, it's back at my house. And Jay said, you know, he wore a heavy coat. It was like 0 outside. He said it took him 4 hours to drive home. He drove this convoluted way, and he finally got home, and then he pretended to be in the house looking for the keys for another half an hour. So he finally gives the guy the keys to this rental car. And now he's actually working for a dry cleaner. And this dry cleaner had 4 major sources of revenue. So the 4 areas of revenue for this company were dry cleaning, suede cleaning, the uniform cleaning and sales business, and they were in the mat and mop business. So what they did is they sold mats to retailers, and they would actually put those mats on a route, and they would go out and take those mats and clean them. And they also sold mops. And they were also in the mop and mat rental business, so they did it both ways. They actually sold the mats and mops, and they would go out and take those and clean them, and they would also rent those as well. And Jay was actually hired as a manager over these 40 stores. And Jay said it was very, very interesting. The suede business was very, very competitive. And the suede business actually a lot of times came from other dry cleaners. So there were a lot of dry cleaners out there who did not clean suede themselves, but they would take suede in and they would pass that on to another dry cleaner. And Jay said that this business was very competitive. And what happened, he said that what they would do, they would go to all of these dry cleaners and they'd say, look, you know what? We don't just want your suede cleaning. If you give us your suede cleaning, we will spend X amount of dollars on ads promoting your store. We will create flyers for you to pass out. We will make an investment in your business to get your business. We're not just going to come in here and take your suede cleaning. We're going to actually be a partner and help you grow your business. And Jay said that by doing that, he said they stole like $2 million worth of suede cleaning business from all of these other dry cleaners who were actually doing that. And he said the reason they were able to do that is because they were actually going out there and making an investment in those people's businesses. And Jay said that it was, the dry cleaning industry was very interesting. They had these 4 different revenue streams. And he said that what happened is that business was very, very busy from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. when people dropped dry cleaning off. And then around from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. And the rest of the time it was very slow. And he said that, this guy who owned these stores was an expert at point of sale and putting additional things in the store. So he said that at the point of sale where people pick up their dry cleaning, they had racks of ties. And those racks of ties were brought in by another company who would come in, they would put 100 ties on the counter, and once a month they would come back, they would count the ties missing, and they would basically collect on what was sold. And the store was getting a commission on every tie sold. And not only did they do that with ties, they were also selling 8-track tapes. And Jay said at the time that there was no copyright law. So you could actually get an 8-track tape, you could make a copy of an original 8-track tape, and you could sell that. And he said it cost around a dollar for the tape and around $1.50 for the duplication. And so for $2.50 you could have a tape that you could sell for $4.50 or $5. And they were selling tens of thousands of these a month. And the guy was making all kinds of money from the 8-track tape business. And they were in all of these different things they were doing. And it was all to increase the point of purchase and to sell more of what they were already selling. And Jay worked with this company for around a year. And Jay left the company, and he said he left the company because he really wasn't a manager. He said he didn't like being over a bunch of employees. He was more of a grassroots type of a person, more sales oriented. And he said he just didn't like being a manager because he didn't think that was his strong suit. And so he left. And when he was leaving, he actually made a deal with the owner who liked him. And that owner basically put Jay in the 8-track tape business. And so when Jay found out how many 8-tracks were being sold and about all of these point of purchase opportunities, when you got a rack of something on a shelf and you're giving someone an opportunity to sell some of that and they don't have any upfront cost, Jay knew there was an opportunity there. And so what Jay did is he took that business and he went to like 50 stores in Indianapolis, convenience stores, truck stops, any place where there was counter space, and he said, I want you to put this 110 case of 8-track tapes on your desk here. I want you to sell them, and for every one of these you sell, I'll give you $1.50. And what you're going to do is you're going to sell these for a week, and it's not going to cost you any money up front. And then what I'm going to do is a week later I'm going to come in, we're going to count the ones missing, and you're going to give me $3 for every one missing, and you're going to keep $1.50 for yourself. And Jay put himself in the 8-track tape business, and he was immediately making over $1,000 a week. And what he did is he hired his brother, and he bought his brother a beat-up station wagon, and he hired his brother for $200. And what he did is he gave his brother this 8-track tape route and said, you're going to be responsible for going to these stores on a weekly basis, collecting the money, replacing the tapes, and you're going to be in charge of that. And like I said, fortunately for Jay, he now was making $1,000 a week, and he wasn't doing anything. He was in the 8-track tape business, and he was getting restless and looking for other opportunities. And so what we're going to do is we're going to end out here, and what we're going to do is we're going to pick up on the next section, and we're going to start talking about some of the consulting opportunities Jay got and where Jay advanced from here.